Okay, I've started to take down the bracing, but before I got too far, I wanted to go ahead and shoot this video to give you some of the lessons learned from my 5th DIY pour on this 48-foot tall passive ICF house that I've been building mostly on my own. And when I say building mostly on my own, can you see all of these hundreds of ICF blocks? Yeah, I've stacked about 99% of them. But anyways, on a concrete pour day though, I do pull in reinforcements, and so on this last pour I had my dad, I had my son, I had my uncle, I had my ICF consultant, I had a YouTube friend that came down and helped, and so I do end up with help on ICF pour days, but the rest of the time mostly it's just me. So anyways, let me go ahead and go around and give you some of the lessons learned that I have from my 5th and final ICF pour, at least for the concrete walls. So I still need to pour the rest of my garage floor, still need to pour the crawl space at 6'2". Makes it so I don't have to pay property taxes on it. I still need to pour the driveways, so I still have more concrete pouring. But as far as ICF wall pouring, yeah, this is it, I'm done. So with that said, let's get going. All right, so lessons. One of the lessons that every single time after every single pour, I've always said the same thing, and that is I rush it. I'm doing last minute stuff just before the concrete comes. I'm doing last minute stuff while we're waiting for the concrete. And so after the 4th pour, I was like, I'm not gonna rush it. But I did. And one of the reasons why I did is you can probably see out these windows, the clouds, the snow. Yeah, we've got some weather coming in. We've got temperatures that are going to be down to about 12 degrees coming up. And so I had this little short window where I had 2 days where I wasn't going to have any nighttime temperatures below freezing. And so I went ahead and broke my rule and I rushed it. So let's talk about some of the consequences of what happens when you rush it. Now the good news is on concrete pour day, it was the most beautiful weather. And for being January 2nd, I mean, the next day we broke all-time records for the highest temperature. The day that we were pouring, it was sunny, it was warm, we were taking off all our cold weather gear, short sleeves. Yeah, it was a beautiful day to pour. But even though, so I'm closing in on 48 hours since the pour, but last night I went ahead and I put in the 2-inch pieces of foam up there on top. Obviously inside my ICF walls, that concrete is totally protected, but the top isn't. So I went ahead and took the time last night, even though it wasn't going to drop below freezing, to go ahead and put it two inches of foam, and then I've got 2x4s holding it down. I only had 2 of them blow off last night. So that was the reason for the rushing it. So now let's get to some of the consequences. Here's one of the consequences, and that is the night before the pour, I ended up calling my ICF consultant. I said, Jeremy, I'm in a bind. I'm not going to be ready for the pour tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Any way that you can meet me at 8 o'clock in the morning to help me finish bracing these windows. Because as soon as you put concrete above the build buck, then yeah, that build buck's not holding it on its own. You've got to brace the windows. So he very graciously, huge shout out to him for getting up early, coming down and helping me, doing the hour drive and coming down and helping me get the windows braced. So did we make it in time for 1 o'clock? And the answer is yes, with 10 minutes to spare. Also, I did not have all the build buck in as well. And so I was rushing to get the last of the build buck. And for those of you who are not familiar with build buck are these, and they're a thermal brake that also has the plastic embedded in them so that you're able to screw your windows in. But by having that thermal brake, I figured I'm paying all this money for the concrete and for the ICF blocks. Why use 2x12s, which, well, it has some insulation, not much. Basically, it's a thermal bridge. So the heat during the winter goes right out and during the summer it comes in through the wood. So instead I'm paying extra. This is what the pieces look like. You can see where I've cut them. Frantically doing all the cuts. This is actually all the scrap though that I have. So I did a pretty efficient job of getting all the cuts and using up all the build buck because it's not necessarily cheap. Also, in terms of bracing, usually Jeremy likes to brace these a lot better. I like to brace these a lot better, but given the time, went ahead and rolled the dice, and you can see they all worked out. So didn't have time to tape, didn't have time to foam. All that we had time to do was just get the buck in and to get it braced. Like I said, I had a total of 10 minutes to spare. So for example, like on this one, I would have really liked to have had a 2x4 going up in the middle. But with that 2x12 going across the top, and even though there was 4 or 5 feet of concrete above it, it held. This one is braced more like what we usually like to do, what we usually like to see. So that one, very confident. This one, it worked, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that design. But just so you know, that design does work for when you have, what is that, a good 5 feet of concrete above it. Same thing over here. Usually we do the design a little bit differently, but if you are in a pinch and you need to be going fast, then you can actually have just a 2x4 going across the top in the middle, and you can see how it was screwed in and how it was braced, and it held those walls. And we didn't need to do, normally you can, if you want to, you can put some OSB, screw it in right there, screw it in right there, and be super belt and suspenders. But like I said, you can see that it worked. Over here, this is bare minimum bracing. So this is what I did the day before, and I was thinking I need to get the bare minimum in, and then I'll come back and I'll put another 2x4 here when I have time and another 2x4 there when I have time. Yeah, I didn't have time. One of the reasons why I wasn't as concerned is because that's only about 2.5 feet of concrete above it. So it held. And one of the other things that you'll notice is as we're going around, for somebody I've never done ICF before. This is my first time ever doing ICF. Like I said, I do this mostly solo, except on concrete pour days, or when I need to bring in somebody to help me with the crane to bring in stuff like this. And so I did pay extra to hire an ICF consultant who taught me how to brace it. And everyone who's ever come by who knows anything about ICF, including the concrete pump truck people, the building inspectors, they're all shocked that I've got this 72-foot long building that's 48 feet high that's actually plumb and straight. And they say usually these ICF walls are super wavy, but as you can see from up here, it's not. And a lot of it has to do with, yes, I did do overkill on the bracing. I've got it braced every 4 to 4.5 feet, but I also have straight and plumb walls, and you only get one shot at getting straight and plumb walls. So I figure it was worth it. Okay, some other things that suffered because I rushed it. So up top, those little metal things, those are Berman hangers. And the Berman hanger, the engineering, the manufacturer says that as long as it's on the inside, then you technically don't need to put, let me see if I have any, I think I do have some extra material from the Berman hanger so you can actually see what that Berman hanger looks like on the inside. What's inside the concrete? Yep, here it is. So going in is this, and then it's screwed into that metal plate up there, and those little holes, if it's on the outside, then the Manufacturer says you should put rebar. If it's on the outside of the house, manufacturer says you should put rebar through it. But because this is going to be holding up my roof, technically they're just going to be holding up the 2x12s. So my 2x12s get bolted in to those Berman hangers, and then my I-joists get Simpson tied into the 2x12s. But those Berman hangers are what is making the connection to the concrete. And so my thought was, yes, it's on the inside of the house, but there could be a tremendous amount of uplift, not so much pull out. But I wanted to go ahead and put the rebar through those. So was that done before the concrete and the pump truck showed up? Not all the way. So I had my friend Jake and my son and my dad. They were quickly bending pieces of rebar, inserting them in before we started pumping, and they were able to get the rebar through all of the Berman hangers. I wanted to do it both the top and the bottom, but we were only able to get it in the top and some of the bottoms. So that was another thing that didn't get done because I rushed it. So here's some of the other details that I was scrambling to do. Penetrations. So penetrations should have been done days before the concrete pour day. But yeah, I finished the penetrations, what, a good 20 minutes before the truck showed up, but at least they're in there. So I'm gonna make a video about this. So that is actually a 6-inch plastic pipe up there at the top. Over on the other side is a 6-inch plastic pipe. And the reason for those is this is gonna be kind of an experiment, kind of not an experiment. No, this really is an experiment. So I've got a 48, as I mentioned many times, this house is 48 feet tall. 48 feet tall means that the stack effect, which is the pressure differential between the crawl space and up here, is massive. And it creates a tremendous amount of pressure. So the warm, moist air from the entire house is going to end up, because those are the two tallest points, it's gonna end up there. And what my plans are is to help get moisture out of the house. Fortunately, I live in a high mountain desert, and so pulling in the air from outside is no big deal because it's dry. But all the warm, moist air that we have inside the house is going to end up in this area. So I'll have 6-inch inline fans if needed. Ideally, I want this whole system to just work passively, to where that stack effect is going to end up blowing the air, because I've got basically 2 condo units up here. And so I'll have the west side, all that air go out through that 6-inch. And then on the east side, I'll have all that air go out that 6-inch pipe. And then the air that's going to be replacing it, because this is a passive house, incredibly tight. What I'm going to be doing with all my windows is way above and beyond what code requires. All the windows are casement, and I'll be doing liquid flashing. So this house is going to be crazy insanely tight. But down in the crawl space area, I also have a massive intake area where I'll have an HRV. And so the air coming in from the outside will be preconditioned. So that's how I'm going to be replacing all this air. So anyways, I really wanted to get those 2 penetrations in, and I was able to. The other penetrations, because this is a multi-generational home, we're gonna have 4 families living here. Who knows? I mean, right now, I've lost track of how many bathrooms. Just up here on this floor alone, there's 4 bathrooms. And so plumbing needs in terms of venting, there's a lot. And I also, because I plan on this being a 500-year home, multi-generational down the road, they may be able to figure out ways to increase the density of how many families are able to live in here. And so I wanted to give them expansion when it came to the plumbing pipe. So that's a 3-inch plumbing pipe right there. I also wanted to set this up so that there are no penetrations in the roof. So that pipe is 10 feet away from where the casement window is going to be on the left side. And then this window over there, that's a picture window. That's a picture window. So according to code, I can actually have my plumbing vent pipe go out my sidewall. So I have 1, 2, and then down there you can't see it because of the scaffolding. I have 3-inch plumbing vent pipes, which is way more than enough capacity for all the plumbing fixtures. So we should be just fine, but I had to get those in. So that was kind of a rush job. Now let's talk about the most embarrassing part of the pour yesterday. And that is, I've been super proud of the fact that so far I've only had 1 ICF blowout. I don't even know if I would call it a blowout, because it wasn't that the ICF blocks failed. It was on my first pour down in the crawl space. That was back before I started pouring my beams in place. And what I did was morning of, very early in the morning. So that's one good thing, is usually I had my pours at 8 o'clock in the morning. At least this time I scheduled it for 1 o'clock in the afternoon to give me some more time in case I was having to scramble. But on that particular morning, I had not created my plywood box that needed to set inside the ICF wall so that it would create a beam pocket. And so I scrambled, I put it together, but I forgot to foam it in, and I forgot to basically brace it in. This is down in the crawl space. So as soon as the concrete filled up that area, it just pushed that plywood box out. And out of the corner of my eye, I just saw this huge gush of concrete coming out of the wall, and my uncle yelled, "Hey, Aaron," and I pushed the hose away. The concrete pump operator shut it off. And once again, my ICF consultant saved my butt, and he was able to get it back in, got it braced, and we were able to do the pour. So you would think that I would learn my lesson in terms of bracing. And the plan was, so you can see these 2x4s that go along all 72 feet. I wanted to have 2x4s going around the interior at the top all the way around. And so you can see that I did the north wall, but I didn't do the east wall. And I say I didn't do that east wall, even though you can see that 2x4 up there, and I'll explain why in a second. I did most of the south wall, but you can still see that there's some areas that are missing at 2x4s. And then the east wall totally didn't have time to get those in. But I thought, hey, we're only talking about 3-4 inches. The block should be able to hold that back. Well, they did everywhere except for the 3 inches behind that 2x4 that you see up there. And that's because there was no plastic, these plastic tabs. So these plastic tabs, so imagine this, if the plastic tabs would have been up there, then I would have had no problem. But in that particular area, I only had this much foam, and so that meant the plastic tabs were gone. But I thought, oh, it's only 2 inches. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine. Because as the pressure from the concrete pump, even though we were going really slow at that point, because it was the last little bit, that plop, 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 took the foam and just pushed it right over. So I yelled out to Jeremy. Once again, ICF consultant, saved my rear. Came over, pushed it in, screwed in the 2x4s where they should have been in the first place, had I not rushed it. And so that's my kind of sort of blowout. You can see a little bit of concrete pouring down. But considering how high up we were, let me go ahead and share with you some of the things, because I'm the one who had 1 million. There's 1 million pounds of concrete in this thing. And I was the one who was running I was at the end of the hose for all the pours. And here's the advice that was given to me that made it so that in terms of really true ICF blowouts, we had a total of 0 on all 5 pours, hundreds of square feet of ICF block. Like I said, 1 million pounds of concrete, we had 0. One of the tips is don't ever, ever, ever pour the concrete directly into the corner. What you want to do is you want to be at least this far out, and it just kind of slumps into the corner and slumps into the corner. So that was one of the things that saved me. The other thing was I got good enough that there's with one pump truck operator, I was actually at a 10. Now, when you're pumping at a 10 pressure, that's basically full throttle. It's bucking on you, and you're really having to be incredibly careful to make sure that that concrete is going straight down into the walls, because there's so much pressure and it weighs so much. And on some of these pours, like this particular pour down here below, I actually did a 15 foot tall pour from that corner to about right there, which for my ICF consultant, it was either 14 or 15 feet. Anyways, it was a record for him. There's a spot over around the other side. I did a 19 foot tall pour, which is even higher than what the manufacturer recommends. Granted, it was only 3 feet wide. But the concrete is falling a long ways. And if you're not pointing the hose straight down, then you can. As strong as this foam is, and actually it's kind of weak too, you'll blow right through that. So I always was incredibly vigilant to make sure that I had the hose pointed straight down. And for anyone who's ever been on the end of those hoses, it's kind of exhausting, because especially, I mean, I had 4 different pump operators, and some were a lot better than others in terms of keeping it directly above. But if they weren't, still it's on me to be manipulating that hose so that it's going straight down. So that's one tip that I would give you. Something else that you'll notice in terms of the bracing, now that I'm looking at it, is the reason why I've got the bracing going across the top is so that it keeps the ICF blocks from kind of wanting to move out. The reason why I don't have it below is because these walls were already pre-poured to about halfway up. So you'll also notice I don't have my buck there. After my first experience down in the basement level, where I was cutting holes like what most people do and trying to fill that up, and the angles, it was a pain. So I decided from then on to switch over to this other method that I kind of just came up with on my own, and it works really well, and then I'll put in the buck after. But anyways, that's the reason why I've got the 2x4s going completely across the walls up there, but not below. I used to have them below, but that pour was a month and a half ago. All right, some of you may be wondering about these 2x4s. Those are still there from the prior pour. They really weren't doing anything. This particular 2x4, that I put in because, as you can see, this is a windy day. Before I had my bracing in, if I had not put in those 2x4s, then my ICF walls would have blown over. So every, I don't know, 6 feet or so, I had 2x4s that went in before I had my bracing up. And because I did a lot of this stacking just on the ladder. It was only the last couple of rows of block that I did from up on the scaffolding. Something else you'll see is normally I would always pull in my ICF blocks. I came up with a way, you can watch other videos on how I would suck in if I had gaps like this orange gap. But because I was so close to the top and I wasn't really gonna need to continue to stack any higher, and it was getting to be just a pain, I went ahead and just foamed it in and then put the OSB to keep everything together, and that worked nicely. In terms of to foam or not to foam, here's a good way to see the difference. So the plan was I was going to foam in that crack, but obviously I didn't get around to it. And as you can see, yeah, for the most part, the concrete, especially maybe because it was towards the top, but it didn't really come pouring out. And let's see if there's, as I walk around, if there's some other things. On the No, you probably don't need to know about that, but I do have some J-bolts on the other side for some future proofing up there. And right here, we decided to change the windows, and so that's the reason why you see this extra OSB, is because this segment up through here, that was added on after the fact. So I've got OSB on the inside and on the outside. So that's how I was able to change my window sizes afterwards. One of the nice things about doing a custom build is if you want to throw on an extra 6 inches and make the window a little bit smaller. And the reason why we went smaller is because we also went taller. You can do so. And then, oh, here's another, instead of, I've already taken out the screws, but on this OSB sheathing, instead of screwing all 4, I actually only screw one right here and one right there. And it was actually my son who came, saved my rear end, spent the last couple nights helping me to get everything braced, and he was able to get those screwed in. We were actually doing some of it the morning of. So once again, it's a rush thing. Concrete vibrator was very nice, especially for those beams, because I'm pouring them in place. Then we'd actually vibrate the beam, and so that worked nicely to make sure that there was consolidation around the beam. Also, I put a blue polymer, it's called Blue Max. So it's this polymer waterproof painting thing. I painted that around the entire beam so that it protects it from the concrete. And let's see if there's anything else. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to. Oh, actually there is one safety thing. All right, so somebody pointed it out in another one, and I really wish that I would have done it. I'm glad that we survived this experience without doing it. I have gotten some now for my roof, but that is the safety harnesses, because both Jeremy and I were in these windowsills, me putting up the buck, him putting up the bracing, and we were being extra careful, but all it takes is one slip and you don't survive that fall. So that was pretty stupid. For me to not have the safety equipment here, and I deeply regret it. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. So please learn from my mistake. Get your safety equipment so that if you have anybody who is standing out here on this ledge, putting in these anywhere near that, if they're standing up on the ledge, they need to have the safety equipment on, the fall protection, so that you don't have a deadly mistake that you regret the rest of your life. So I do highly recommend, please learn from my mistake, get the safety harnesses if you're going to be anywhere near where there's the ability to fall out. And I think that was the last thing that I wanted to cover. So still, while I don't have any more ICF updates to do, I still am going to be putting on my Yeti cooler roof. I'm still going to be doing all of the plumbing. I'm still going to be doing all the electrical myself. Still going to be doing all the flooring, all the sides, all the interior framing, putting in the kitchens, putting in the cabinets. And so this adventure is just barely begun. So be sure to like and subscribe so you can follow along as I do this crazy DIY multi-generational build. And for anyone who's stuck around until the end, I'd just like to thank you. And so until next time, thanks for watching.